Welcome to Wire Guild. The tutorial that I'm going to show you is a captured cabochon woven pendant tutorial. Now, depending on the shape of your cab will depend on how your piece looks when it's finished. I used a teardrop shape. The rest of the materials are 0.8mm or 20 gauge round wire, 0.4mm or 26 gauge round wire, and a cabochon. Now, as I've said, the cabochon will determine what your piece looks like when it's finished. So any stone with a nice flat back will look good. Usually symmetrical stones look a little bit better. So I've got my material and I've got my 0.4mm wire or 26 gauge, and I'm just showing you here. This is fine silver, so it's a little bit more soft and malleable. So when you're wiggling it about going through your weaving process, it's not as likely to break. But the 0.8mm that I've got is just normal sterling silver. Now I've got 4 lengths, and this is my stone, and I'm going to show you how I've worked out the lengths for the stone. The stone's a nice pear shape. Putting your wire up and just try to guess is you know, sometimes you'll get it right, sometimes you'll get it wrong. What I tend to do is just using a ruler, put my stone down to the end, and then just roughly, I've got my hand in the way, sorry, I'm just rolling the stone over on the ruler, and it's about 3 inches, give or take. Now I could measure around it, and that probably would be more exact. I could use a piece of string and wrap that round and then measure it afterwards, but this works quite well. Now I've given myself a bit extra. I've got 9.5 inches, so I'm not quite 3 times the circumference, but that's usually what I work on. So the circumference times 3 gives me my lengths of wire. Now if you want to be very ornate, add some more. Now I'm going to straighten these wires out, because I think the cat sat on them, something like that. They're all wiggly. A little bit of preparation before you weave is always a good idea, as long as your wires are nice and smooth. I'm not going for dead straight. As you can see, that they're a little bit curved, but they don't have any sort of kinks or bends or anything like that. That makes weaving more awkward. So my wires are straightened. Let's just even them up, and then we can get my fine silver. So again, fine silver, it's 999, not 925. You can use sterling, it just tends to be a little bit springier, and I'm just straightening that end out. Obviously if you're doing this in copper, just fine copper wire's fine. So put my wire over the top of one of the thicker wires, and I'm wrapping around about 4 or 5 times, and then I'm just going to push those wires together so it's nice and neat. So I've got my end here, my wires are moving freely, I'm working from the reel. Let's just get myself some more, and I'm going to bring my second wire next to the first one, and I am wrapping over both of them. Okay, so over the top of both, and then in between them both, and the wires up. Yeah, bring the third one in, over the top of both again, and then around that top one, and the wires facing up, and the fourth wire comes in, straighten the ends, over both, and around the top one, and the wire goes up to the top. Now then, it's easier when you're doing this. So I've gone over 2, through 1, over 2. Maybe it's easier if I draw it. So I've got my dodgy pencil. 1, 2. I've got my 4 main wires. The finer wire has gone around 4 or 5 times, wrapping around there. This pencil is very strange. Don't know why it's not working. Let me just give it a rub on the paper. That might work a little bit better. And then I've gone over 2 wires, wrapped around, over 2, wrapped around 1, over 2, wrapped around the 1, and then the wire goes straight upwards. So that's exactly what I've done here. I've gone over 2, round 1, Those were just my start wires. Now the easiest way is to turn the whole thing over. So my wire is now at the bottom, my tail, and then I'm going to do the same thing again. Over 2, around 1, over 2, around 1, over 2, around 1, and then my wire is up at the top. Exactly the same thing because I turned it over. Now let's just flip it over again. So I'm going over wire number 1 and number 2 and then wrapping it around wire number 2. Over 2 and 3, wrap around 3. Over 3 and 4, wrap around 4. Wire to the top. Turn the whole thing over. So it's coming up over 1 and 2 and around just number 2. Over 2 and 3 and around 3. Over 3 and 4 and around 4, and the wire goes back to the top. Once you get into the swing of doing the weaving, it's really quite relaxing. You'll find you can just sit there and fiddle with it. Now what I want you to look at next is what my thumb and finger are doing. As the wires go around, I push in and pull it tight. Now let's start again at the bottom. So I'm going, oops, that one's crossing slightly. If it's crossing, you can't really see what you're doing, so I'm going in between. Push with my thumb, push with my index finger, push thumb, index, wrap around and turn it over and start again. That little push that I do with my thumb and my finger makes sure that the wire is tight next to the other wires that we've already woven, and it helps to stop the little bagginess you sometimes get on weaving. When you look at somebody who's been weaving for a while, when you look at their work, all you see is the weaving. When you see somebody who's just started new, what you'll find is that the fine wire doesn't sit tight onto the frame wires. So you get these little areas where you've got like a little loose bit of wire, and the overall effect is not as smooth and finished and neat. Now it's okay, and when you're starting you're probably going to get a little bit of that, and believe me, nobody else will see it, but you will. So to progress, to get it to that point where it looks really, really professional, it helps to use your finger and thumb to just push these wires in. So I'm still doing exactly the same thing. But practice. Can you also see that I'm using the middle finger on my left hand, my non-dominant hand, to hold it? And you're getting this ziggy-zag weaving. Now I'm going to use my pliers and I'm just going to tighten that up. There we go. So it's nice and tight. So I'm trying to get a place where it's in focus and you can see it. It's almost like knitting. Because you're almost getting one row of stitches and then a different row of stitches coming back down by us turning the whole thing over. Now this is going to be the framework that our stone sits on. So if you're thinking about width, you can't really get away with much more than... I'm sorry about that. That was my cat knocking things over. So I've just speeded the camera up. I thought I'd let you see that rather than cutting it out, because to realise that my life doesn't always go smoothly as everybody seems to think. It's like, oh, yours always works out fine. Yeah, mad cats included. So I'm just easing my wires out now because I need a little bit more, because I've been weaving from one end and I need a little bit more room to keep weaving. So I'm just pulling each wire out one at a time and then getting them straight at my pliers and then continue with the weaving. So I've now woven 3 inches. Honestly, there was no point in you sitting there and watching me weaving 3 inches. You can always go back and watch the first bit again if you need to see it again. And I'm moving the wires so that they are in the centre of my 9-inch of frame wires. So I'm going to have about 3 inches of plain wire, 3 inches of weaving, 3-inch plain wire. Now it can be awkward to move it, and what I'm doing is a little bit at a time and then smoothing it down. Push, push, push and smooth. Now this is going to be the underneath of our stone. It's going to be the area that performs, that's the wrong word, that provides the base for the stone. So we don't want it really, really, really tight, because we're actually going to weave other wires into it. So I'm pushing it up so it looks neat, but I aren't getting it as absolutely tight as I could. There's a little bit of movement in between each. So let me just see that I've got this central. So there we go. Yeah, we're between 3 and 6, and I've got like my 3 inches of wire. So I'm tight, but not super tight, because we do need to weave through it, and we do need little holes to get through. So I've got a tail end there, and I've got my long end here. So I want to bring these so that they're both at the same side. So I'm just going to weave back up, so the wire that I'm working from is at the same side to where I started. It doesn't really matter, it's just me being sort of OCD about my wires all being in the same place. So I'll bring that back to the top. Okay, so I could do my stone that way, and that is easier. If I do my stone that way, it is more difficult. It's the way that you hold the stone in. For some reason, the larger area at the bottom makes life easier, and the smaller area at the bottom makes life harder. So let's do it the hard way, just so you can see me doing it. Just making sure I've got that middle point. I'm going to grip that between my fingers. I've got my snipe nose pliers, and I need a point in this. So I've got my pliers. I'm going to grip over the top, and I am going to hold and bend. And can you see I'm just bending a little bit, and I'm letting go, bend, little bit, let go, until I've got a V shape. Then I'm going to take that up with my fingers. Right, that's not big enough because the stone's going to drop through at the back. So tighter. Keeping that V flat with my fingers while I'm going. Move those out of the way. We want the stones to be supported on this, and at the moment I'm not sure that we are in tight enough. Let's just have a fiddle with that. Eventually I'm going to bring those wires from the top over, and that will hold the stone in. So we're going to need some bails. So let me just get this wire. I'm taking the 2 inner wires from one side and the 2 inner wires from the other side, and I'm bringing them together in the middle. That's it. And I'm just going to ease that in and then back out again, so that they're going to lay. I don't want them to cross like this, but I need to know that my stone's not going to drop through. Yeah, it needs to be a little bit closer. So I bend that back up and bend that one up. Move the finer wire out of the way because I don't want to get tied up in that, and I'm just gradually making that tighter so that where the spot where they come together, my stone will, my very slippy stone will sit on the framework without falling through. So I think that might need to be just a tad tighter, and just that one as well. Try and make sure these are even. You can usually see quite well with your eye. Now I need my wire up near where those 2 wires are going to touch. So instead of I've got a kink. Always get rid of your kinks before they actually get tightened in. I'm going to wrap it around these 2 wires so that I can really, it's to move it where I want it to be, which is where the 2 wires are shaped in towards each other. I could just cut the wire off and restart it again, but it gives you an awful lot of ends. I'd rather work the wire in one piece. It probably doesn't make any difference at all. It's probably just in my mind that I tend to think that the whole thing will be stronger if I haven't started cutting bits off and adding more bits in. Now I am wrapping all the way around. I'm just going over and over the 2 wires. I'm not doing an under and over or anything. I'm just binding those 2 wires until my fine wire is in the right place in between there. Then I'm going to bring them together, wrap around the other side in between. There we go, round again, and then in between, and then up around the first side, in between, go around. So it's a figure of 8, and I'm doing the figure of 8, so I'm going round 1, 2 on that side, through the middle, then up and round 1, 2 on that side. Now I'm just straightening that. Now just speeded it up because I'm doing exactly the same thing, keeping it tight with my pliers. And it's got a nice little sort of V shape going on, and I'm just going to weave for a bit to get the back of the, just unravel some more wire. This piece that I'm weaving is going to form the bails, you know, that your chain or your thong or your ribbon or whatever you're hanging your pendant from is going to go through. Just making sure it's neat. And again, you can still see that I'm using my index finger and my thumb to push everything down. Let's just move that out of the way. This little tail end piece here, I'm just going to trim it off and press the end down. Then I'm not catching it all the time. There we go. Now that was the piece that we originally first started with. Now, so I've got a framework where my stone can sit on top. I've started the bails. I'm going to close it in just a little bit more. You can do these little adjustments at this point. It's okay. There, so we're not going to drop through. The inner of the 2 wires that are left I are using are going to come down something like this. Something to hold the stone in place. Now if you had a smaller stone, do be careful not to cover it up too much with the wires, but roughly that's where it's going to go. So I'm going to keep weaving the bails, and I'm just going to move the sides in now so they were parallel. Before they were working out on a nice V, and after going just a little bit, this probably only maybe a half an inch or a centimetre or so, and then I have brought those wires in at the side so they're parallel. And I'm just going to speed this up, and I'm going to get the bail so that's woven and finished with, rather than starting the framework to actually hold the stone in place. It's easy to do when there isn't a stone there, that's all. So again, notice the thumb and finger, and also my middle finger on my left hand. It's helping, middle finger and the fourth finger are helping holding the weaving in place. When people see me doing this, if I'm at shows and I'm just passing time by weaving, they tend to think that I'm crocheting. Right, I'm going to cut some of this off. I'm going to give myself quite a bit, just in case I need that bail a little bit longer. But I need the other end of the wire. I need to start and attach other bits, so I need to cut that off. So then, I'm going to, because it's quite a large stone, and these wires that are coming down the middle are delicate, shall we say. If I'd used 1 mil or 1.2 mil, I probably wouldn't need to connect the 2 wires together. But in this case I'm going to, so I've wrapped around 3 or 4 times to anchor my fine wire. Sorry, excuse me, I've got the hiccups. And then I'm going to slide that up to where the wires sort of meet there. There we go. Yep, that's about the right spot. And then I'm going to weave the wires when the stone drops out. I'm supporting now with my left hand so those wires do not move. They're in the same position as they were when they were over the top of the stone. So I'm holding those carefully with the left hand, while with my right hand I get a wrap on. Once I've got one on, I can then move my left hand and support so that it's more comfortable to weave. And I'm just going to weave back and forth. I may do, come on, through you go. I'm being very gentle because I don't want to move the shape that I made over the top of the stone. And if I start being rough with this, I will distort that curve that I've got that I need to go over the stone. So very, very gently, and wrapping around twice and then going back. As this comes together, I can just make a single wrap figure of 8, but not just yet, it's not quite touching. Push that in tighter. It's easier to keep your wires neat if you go around twice before you do the figure of 8. Doing a single figure of 8 is harder to keep it tight, so I only use it when the wires are as close can be, because then it's easier to pull to get it tight enough. So that's what I'm doing now. It's just a figure of 8 around both wires, and I'm only going to do enough weaving to make sure that that holds together, which is done. And then I'm going to wrap around 3 or 4 times again, sort of like cast the wire off it, make sure it doesn't go anywhere, and snip that. And I've done it on the opposite wire to the one that I cast it on, so that it's not going to be symmetrical, because of course you've got one slightly longer length on one wire. But if you had the long lengths both on the same wire, it would look a little odd, so I've done it offset. So that's going to hold the top of my stone in place and stop it popping out the top. Now then, what should we do with these sides? I'm going to bring them around there. That will stop the stone then dropping out at the bottom. And the same with the other side. Now I need a little piece of wire, because where I've curled that wire, I need to attach it to the base. So where that curl is, I'm going to pass the wire through the woven base. Now this is why if you've done it super duper tight, you're going to have awful trouble getting the wire through. Now you can use your fingernail and you can just push the two weavings apart to give you a little gap to go through, and then you can get the wire through and just wrap it around your wire. Whoops, doesn't matter if the stone drops out now. And I'm just going to come here around my frame wire, the one that we bent, with my finer wire 2 or 3 times, as if I was casting it on. It's just to make it nice and stable. But remember, the other end of the wire is going through the underneath, in between that weaving that we've already done. So just wrap this around. Of course, when you're making yours, this can take as long as you need it to, and you may find this time when you want to put it down and have a rest and then come back to it later. That's fine. So I'm going to pull that tight, this bit here, because of course that's going through the frame, and we need it tightish to hold the stone in. So I'm going to bend the other side around. I'm trying to keep it symmetrical. I must admit I'm not very good at it. Symmetrically is not that easy to do when you're allowing the wire to really do what it wants, because usually it doesn't want to be balanced and symmetrical. So I've done the best I can, and I just go on the fact that it's near enough. Let's just another piece of wire so that I can stitch this curve to the framework. So I'm going to wrap this, let's just move that out a little bit. I'm going to wrap my fine wire around one of my thicker or my frame wires, and I'll go around about 4 or 5 times, just so that it's nice and firmly anchored into place. Cut the end off so that I can actually feed it through the base. Now there's no definite right or wrong. There is no, oh dear, Rachel's wires went this way, my wires have got to go that way. However your wires go, as long as they are holding your stone in place and you can attach them, go through. Sometimes these just do not want to go through. As long as you can attach everything down and stitch it in place so that it's nice and firm and your stone's not going to fall out, it's fine. This is really one of those cases where there is no right and wrong way. It's just however the stone will stay in. Me choosing to do this the most difficult way possible with the point upwards instead of downwards is making life harder, but let's just move that. That's a little bit lower than it is on the other side, so I'm just tightening that a little bit. That's better. The stones probably still would fall out if I let go of it, so I'm trying to hold that in place. I'll just tighten that in. So the main wire was a little bit loose over the top of the stone. It was sitting higher, so the stone could have moved up and down. So I used the round nose pliers just to tighten it, and I'm doing the same now on the other side. I'm just pulling that through where I've already stitched it to the base. Wrap it around again a couple of times just to make sure. So it's getting a little bit more secure. Those are coming round over the top and they're anchored in at either side. It just makes it easier. But this stone is determined to drop out. So what should I do with my wire? I could do a nice little wave pattern down the side. I might not have enough wire on this side. Let me just have a look. Sorry about that, that's my dog barking. Right, let's just curl this around into a circle and see what that looks like. There we go. Not sure. That could go down towards the frame, you see, and be stitched through the frame. It would help support either side of the pendant. There's a lot more room on this side, so let me just trim some of that off, and then I can curl this one in. What we're looking for is anything that will give support. So we've put support over the top. The stone is not going to fall off from the top. Now what I'm trying to do is put a support either side of the stone. So I'm wriggling the stone all the time because it moves to get it into the right place. Now unfortunately at that point my camera died, so I've had to take things back and restart again. Now the only thing that I've actually done is those curls that I made at the side, I've brought them forward. I've straightened my outer wires out and I've got my bail there. Can you see how I just brought this down? It had been up there at the side and I've just literally bent the wires forward. I didn't like those little curls at the side, so I bent them down and out of the way, and I like them much better down near the point because they're stopping that point from moving too much. But I do need, can you see that? That wiggle sideways. I need something on the shoulders to stop it, so I'm going to take that wire there, not too high, doesn't need to be ridiculously high. Hang on a minute, let's just get a bit of fine wire. I did say it would end up like a mad octopus, didn't I? Let's just trim that off. So I've got a piece I can work with, and I have taken this down just the side, and I'm going to get the wire through the base. Go on. Doesn't always want to go through. Now you might have one of these. This is an awl, and it has quite a point on it, and you can just use it to wriggle around and make a hole, and then usually you can poke your wire through. If you don't have one, darning needle, or just like I did before, use your thumbnail to separate those wires and move them out of the way. So I've got my wire through, and now I'm just going to wrap around the point where that wire is crossing over the base, and I'm wrapping around 3 or 4 times, and then I'll pull that side tight, and then I'm going to go back in through there and then wrap it around a couple of times. It's a case of the design is almost led by what function you need the wire to do. So I need the wire to prop up at the side there, stop the stone from moving. Therefore the wire goes there. Let's just do something else with this. Where should we go? We could go all the way up and round and it would make like a knot. We could leave it as a loop. Let's see. I'm just going to attach that bit in a bit further to make it a little bit more secure. Let's just make myself a hole, and then I can pass that through. This may seem extremely complicated while you're watching me doing it. Just poke that hole a bit bigger. But when you actually get started on your own, you'll see how it is growing. You'll bring your wires over the top and you'll see automatically where they want to fasten themselves to the base. Just move that there. And then you just stitch them into place with your fine wire. And it really is very much like a sewing thing. It's seeing, let's just go around in a circle. That looks kind of cool. And it gives added support to the side. Alright, now this wire could go, just bend that one out of the way a minute, all the way down to the bottom. That looks kind of nice. Right, now let's try and make the other side match. So in we go, bend it round, just get some wire, and as I put it through I suddenly realised that I've gone the wrong way. So I carried on filming until I had a look and then suddenly realised I was back to front. So I'm going to take the whole thing out, bring it down so that it actually matches, and put it through, and then I'll put the same curl in and bring the wire down to the bottom. When you're doing yours, anywhere your wires cross, try and stitch them in place. Right, so I've got both sides in. My stone is now not moving. It can't go through the back, it can't go from either side, and it can't come forwards. It can't get through the bottom. So it's pretty much in place. So now let's have a look at our bales. I am going to use my round nose pliers, put them across the bales, and then bend the wires over the pliers. I don't use the pliers to move the wires, I move the wires around the pliers. So my back's nice and plain. Let's just make sure that's nice and even. Let's have a look. Now then, I'm going to take one pair of wires backwards and the other pair of wires backwards, and then I'm going to use the fine wire that we did the weaving with over the bales in there, and I'm going to use that, and I am going to stitch, just make sure that that's even, going around just down there. I need an end, it's too much there, let me just cut some of that off. All these little bits come in handy because of course we use these little bits for stitching things together at a later date. So I'm going to take my fine wire and go around that side, up and through the middle. There we go. Around the other side. There we go, tucking that in. It's not really necessary. It just means it's an extra layer of support, if you like, using this finer wire to wrap around. It means that everything's less likely to come undone. I do like to stitch everything to everything else. It gives the piece more strength. You may have noticed sometimes when you pick a piece of jewellery up, it feels really flimsy in your fingers. If you start and stitch virtually everything together and to each other, it develops a really nice strong feel that when you pick it up. So that's what I'm doing. So just smooth that wire down, and then I'm going to pop those two wires, maybe one at a time, that might be easier, through the middle, and pull that one out, pop that one through. Lovely, and just pull that to the front. Again, it's another layer of support, because that wire now is wrapped around those shoulder pieces, meaning that any chain that you pass through is not going to come out, it's not going to come loose or undone. So I'm just going to do the same on the other side. Pop those wires through the middle and then pull them tight. Now there's any number of things you could do with these extra 4 wires that you've got at the front. You could bring them down over the stone, you could take them back over the bales, you could fill the hole in and put beads in there. There's so many different things that you could do at this point, and I am usually swayed by what the stone needs, whether it needs more support. So I've got this little curl sticking out here. I'm going to come back to those other two at the top in a minute. Let me just look down here. If I don't know exactly what to do with the bit, I'll move on to a different area and work with that. I'm going to get rid of some of the curl so that I can make it a smaller curl. At the moment, if I attach that at the bottom, it would take over and you wouldn't see that lovely sort of point or termination of the stone. So I've just made it smaller and even that up. That looks a bit better. It's neater. A little smaller, yeah. Now I just want to bend that in, and I'm going to do the same with the other side. So I'm making the circle smaller and then continuing that little curve so it's a curl and taking it in towards the bottom of the stone there. Okay, now what should I do with these? Let's fasten these little curls into place first. So I'm going to go through both curls with a piece of fine wire, and then I'm going to wrap through again. So I've really got hold of them. Just pull that with my pliers. Whoops. Don't want that wire in there as well. Let's just pull that back. Okay. Now then, pull that tight. Then I can take these end bits through the framework. Hopefully I've got a little hole just there. This is when you find out that you really need glasses. You start trying to think what might be a hole or what you think is a hole, and it isn't, it's just light reflecting. So just pull that through. Lovely, and let's do the same on the other side. And then those little curls at the bottom will be completely anchored into place and they won't be going anywhere. Let's just make a gap. And this is the wonderful thing about having a woven base that you're putting on, because as you stitch through with this fine wire, it just merges into the rest of the weaving that you've already done at the base, and so you no longer see it. It's not like you're going onto plain wire. It's very obvious that you've got a finer wire. Let's see what I can do with these. Just smoothing that one out. I want it to be a little smoother, and I want the curve to come down the front. So I'm going to wrap around with that loose end that I had, I'm going around the stem of the wire, push that up tight. Do the same on the other side, so I'm making sure it's pressed down onto the stone, and then I'm wrapping that fine wire around it. Let's just squeeze that up, make sure it's tight. You'll notice sometimes I use my fingers, sometimes I use the pliers. It depends whatever I think is easiest at the time. Usually the longer the length, the more likely I am to use fingers, and the shorter the length, I'll tend to use pliers because you can get in easier. I do tend to I've got rather large hands and fingers anyway, so they do get in the way. Now then, how tight is that? That will do. So I'm going to trim these little ends off, like that, and then just smooth the cut end down onto the frame wire, and then I'm going to bend that back and just make a little tiny curl at the end, just so that it doesn't slip back out of that wire that we put around it, and then just squeeze that into place down on the front of the piece, and another curl there. These are all freehand curls. You notice I'm not using my round nose pliers to do them, and just bend them round with my fingers, make sure they're touching, and then press them in. Okay, quite like that. Looks nice down there at the bottom. So I have all these loose ends everywhere, and so now is the time for the tidying up. There's a little tiny one there, so I'm just going to snip that off and then press it down with my pliers. Have I got any more little bits around there? These longer ones. Yeah. I'm trying to work out if they're all absolutely finished off, or whether I need to go through or around any more times to make sure that they don't unravel and get them all in the right direction. Okie dokie. How's that doing? Is that still firm? Yeah. Now the top piece, these 4 wires I've got at the top, I'm still trying to work out what to do with them. So I think I might just... Let's have a look at some little beads and see what that would look like. These are just more pieces of labradorite, and you could fill that gap there with them. I don't think I really like it though. It doesn't really look right. So I'm going to take my wires and I'm just going to make a very simple little curl. I'm just getting these wires together because I don't want them separating. And I'm just going to curl that inwards, and it will bridge that gap that was between the weaving and the top of the stone, with just a little curl. Just holding it with the pliers to get it into the right shape, and then I'm going to do the same with the other side. Just a little curl. Yeah, quite like that. You have to be careful sometimes with these because they can look a little bit like insects, and although personally I kind of like beetles and bugs and things like that, I think they're kind of cute, an awful lot of people don't, and when the majority of things you're selling, I'm just wrapping those ends back around the back now. If you're selling to the public, you only need one person to virtually scream that it looks like a beetle, and it's amazing how it frightens everybody else off. So I try very hard to make sure that they don't really have eyes, and they don't look like beetles or bugs or insects or anything like that. So I've wrapped the end back around the shoulder piece to make it nice and firm, and I'm going to do the same with the other side. And I'm just doing one wire at a time because this wire now has become quite well work hardened, so it's getting a little tough, hence the reason it's so hard to pull through. Now it's gone through the wrong place. Can you see how it's gone through the wires that are actually over the top of the stone? I don't want it there, because if I start pulling on that to tighten it down, it's going to misshape those curves. So I just need to get that out of there. It doesn't want to. So I've just bent the end the other way so that I can poke it through and then grab it. Round nose pliers are not the best thing for gripping anything with. They're absolutely useless for it, but in this case it worked. So that's one wire through and in the right place. So let me just take the other wire through. So around that shoulder piece, through the middle, without going through one of the wires that's going over the top of my stone, because that would be bad, and pull that tight. As you can see, the wires got pretty firm, so I'm just going to trim those off short. We go, and then just curve that and press it down nice and tight. There we are. Then I'm just going to wriggle about with these curls on the top. There we are. Make sure my stone's still in. Yeah, lovely and secure. Not going front or back or anywhere else. So, because everything's secure, I don't need to add any more wires anywhere. There isn't a part of the stone that's loose. So I now need to just get rid of all these little wires that are on the side here. Now then, I can make myself a little gap. I'm just going to take this one through again. So I've made myself a little gap in the frame. If the wire at the end gets kinked and bent, it won't go through. It'll totally refuse. That case, just trim it off. So I'm going to go through. Yeah, you see what I mean? Look, that kinked up there, and it's virtually impossible to get through then, so I'll just trim it off. Also, it can be easier if you hold with your pliers, because you can hold really close to the end of the wire and then you can push it through, and often that will go through, whereas if you hold it with your fingers it doesn't. I think it's probably because it's more secure. And then I'm going to trim that end off and just press that down. Lovely. Let's have a look at the next one. If for any reason, where are you going? Right, that's sort of coming in at the top of that circle. That's no good, so I'm just going to wrap it through there to get it back to the right place. That's it. That's better. And then I can trim that one off. If you'd found that you got yours done and say your stone was still a bit loose, you could have taken another piece of the 0.8mm wire and added it over the top and then stitched it to either side. Or if, for instance, your V on the back was allowing your stone to drop through from the back, you could take a piece of wire straight across the back and that would stop the stone dropping out of the back. If your stone is trying to drop through the bottom, again, another piece can be added. So anywhere you need it, depending on how your stone is moving, the shape of your stone, the way you've done it, will depend if you need to add any extra pieces in to hold everything in place. Be quite brutal when you're trying to move your stone with your thumb. Actually give it a good push, see if it will come out. If you are able to move it, you can add another piece of wire in at this stage, and nobody will be any the wiser. They will assume it was exactly the way it was meant to be. I'm going to just wrap that round that one a couple of times. They will assume that's how it was meant to be, and because of that, your stone is then beautifully secure because you've added any extra bits and pieces that you may need, and nobody knows. This is when I say there are no mistakes, there is only new designs. Each new stone will present new challenges, and each stone needs to be treated in a slightly different way, which of course again is another beauty of doing wire jewellery, because it means that because every stone needs to be treated differently, your pieces of jewellery are going to be different. So when I get all these little tiny stray ends pressed in, I've just got one left now. Where shall we put you? Let's see if I can make a little hole just there. And this is probably why I end up with no nails and never have a nice nails, because I do things like this with them. Through you go. And pull that tight. Let's see if I can get through it again. Yep. And again, pull that tight. And then trim it off as close as I can possibly get it. And smooth it down. Right, so that's our pendant. So really, you can use this for any cabochon. I'm just going to take it away and I'm giving it a right good scrub with some soap and water. So I'm just drying it out. I find that with labradorite, when I've worked it for a while, it gets quite dull. I think it must be the grease from my fingers. So I've given that a scrub with soap and water, and it's looking quite pretty and polished. I love these sides, they look very nice. Lovely. Nice and secure, that's the best bit. There's no way that stone is ever coming out of there. You'll find that yours turns out different, depends on the shape of your stone. I'll pop a couple of other photos up. Oh, I bet you could wear that from the back actually, it's kind of nice that way around. I'll put another couple of photos up so you can see some different ideas of it, but you know, it's a nice one and it looks very good finished. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Happy wrapping!